Hello everyone and welcome back to the 401 Games Pro Tour Qualifier in Toronto, Ontario.
Ready for round two, we have GP Richmond champion Brian Liu playing against Dan Wohns. They have both won their first round and are sitting at 3 match points apiece.
Alright, it looks like Brian's won the die roll and is on the play. As is usual with Brian, it looks like he might have a mana dork in his hand and he's playing Forests. Lifetime affinity with green mana.
He is a big fan. It looks like Brian's deck is black-green with cards like Hero's Downfall.
Yeah, Hero's Downfall. It's relatively more in the mid-range area. It's got
He has a Herald of Torment and double Spiteful Returns, as well as a pair of Raised by Wolves as the notable cards.
Yeah.
So we're going to see how that pans out. His opponent, in the meantime,
mulliganing down to 6, and
Brian is mulling down.
Dan picks up those sweetly Targaryen sleeved cards.
Appropriate Targaryen sleeves, as his deck is black-red, featuring a double Magma Jet, double Blood Toll Harpy, double Deathbellow Raider. Seems like a very consistent, aggressive deck.
Interesting. Does he have 3 dragons in it, though?
It is very unlikely that there are 3 dragons in this deck.
It looks like he's not that lucky then.
However, there is one Forged Soaker dragon.
Excellent, excellent. He's 1/3 the way there.
He has won the flavor game already.
Indeed.
Brian's mull to 6, looking, I guess it's reasonable.
Yeah.
Although, to be honest, with Brian, a keep never necessarily means that it's reasonable. Very aggressive start with the Tormented Hero. This kind of deck is very strong in this format.
Yeah. Brian's going to need to get something together very quickly on the ground. He's got a 4-mana removal spell, a Nemesis of Mortals, and a Feral Invocation.
Weight of the Underworld is the removal spell.
So Weight of the Underworld? Yeah.
That will be good, but not quite yet. Yeah. Hopefully Brian has... Is that a... Can't really see.
Yeah.
Unfortunate. If Brian does not have an early drop to save off this aggression, it might be a bit difficult for him, assuming Dan has a follow-up in the second or third turn.
Indeed. A very good draw would be something like a Seder Wayfinder, something to...
That'd be alright.
Yeah.
Value, in addition to killing the Tormented Hero.
Yes, and also helping him hit his 4th land drop.
Which is definitely relevant.
Oh, Ordeal of Perforce.
Good old 1-drop Ordeal, making sure this format is one-sided.
Yeah. This game would be absolutely filthy if Dan won the die roll, but the start's already very, very aggressive.
In case anybody watching is not very familiar with this format, this is one of the best things you can do in this format.
Yes.
Oh, that's a Herald of Torment. Well, that's a pretty good card.
Herald of Torment's a pretty good blocker.
I would go so far as to say that will block Tormented Hero for days.
Indeed.
And by days, I mean at least this turn. So if Dan does have a combat trick or any other way of dealing with that card, then this is going to be difficult for him. There are cards like Boon of Erebos in his deck. Not sure if there's anything else, though. Demolish is not what he wants. Dragon Mantle would not do it.
Alright, it looks like he's sending in the Tormented Hero. It's currently a 4/3.
Looks like he has the boon.
Yeah.
That's a blowout. This is going to be very difficult for Brian to win from here on in.
Indeed. So Dan will go to a 20. We can still gain 1 life off that heroic trigger. Brian should be down to 15 right now from that early attack and 2 Tormented Hero triggers.
Assuming the triggers were remembered.
Oh, yes. And a...
I can't tell what that card is.
The 2/3 guy.
The 2/3?
Yes.
What's the 2/3?
Deathbellow Minotaur, I believe the name is. The 2/3.
Oh, I meant in Brian's hand. We can see the Deathbellow Minotaur in play. Just drew a card and I can't quite tell what it is. It might be a Raised by Wolves, although...
With nothing in play to put it on, it's...
that is not a Raised by Wolves. I can't tell. Fortunately, we don't have hand cams like the Pro Tour, but we'll get there eventually. They don't have hand cams, sorry. They have someone, they have people behind them with iPads.
No.
Our level of technology, however, is not quite so advanced.
And that... It's really unfortunate for Brian that Dan had the Boon of Erebos to grow the Tormented Hero to a 4/3, so the Weight of the Underworld cannot remove it from play. Looks like Brian has another card he can potentially play, but none of his options look really good on this board state right now.
Yeah, the Weight of the Underworld is kind of embarrassing right now.
Yeah.
Anything he plays is just going to get eaten up by the Rage trigger. Sorry, not Rage, the Ordeal trigger. That's going to be very poor for him. This game looks to be spiraling out of his control very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably best for him to play the Weight of the Underworld just to stem the tide somewhat. Deciding whether to play it on the bigger guy and get the full value. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. All right. So
that'll be worse later, but more relevant in the meantime.
Alright, so it looks like Brian will most likely take 4 damage here, dropping to 11. Unless Dan has...
Well, in addition to the trigger from the ordeal, right?
Yeah.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 damage.
7 damage.
Yeah, but 8. Very relevant. It's unfortunate. The cards Brian's played, the cards that Brian has seem like very good, but not in this game.
Yeah. They just are not properly lining up with his opponent's cards at the moment.
The aggressive deck, he's usually the victor in this form.
So, alright, so Brian should be down to a very low 7. Alright, 5th line drop.
He should be at 8.
8?
Agent of the Fates. Agent of the Fates is a very good card. If Brian attempts to play creatures, he's likely going to be blown out afterwards. The
right.
Swordwise Tor believes the name of that card. Might be able to block unless Dan has a way to trigger heroic, and that will seal Brian's fate fairly quickly.
Indeed.
Or on the turn, most likely.
That Feral Invocation.
Yeah, Brian does have the Feral Invocation in hand, and he does have a Nemesis followed up, but Dragon Mantle, that's brutal. What, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, he doesn't have a second red to activate it, so Brian's only going to go to 1 here.
Yeah.
Although with the Tormented Hero in play, any heroic trigger will, any card that triggers heroic.
Yeah, this is just an absolutely dominating board state. Brian doesn't even look at his top
1,
card.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Maybe we missed the damage, whatever. Yeah. Regardless, game was not winnable for Brian. We'll see if he can do better in the second one. Dan's very aggressive start, just taking over very quickly. The fact that Brian almost made a game out of the 1-drop ordeal situation is actually quite remarkable.
Yes, that Boon of Erebos really let this game spiral out of control.
Yeah. When you have to play like a 3-mana 3/3 as your only way to beat a creature, like a 2/1 with an ordeal on it, then you're generally in a bad place due to the abundance of combat tricks in the format.
Indeed. Blocking is just not where you want to be.
Correct.
Brian's playing pretty much all of his green and black cards right now. Like, you could consider bringing in cards like Disciple of Phoenix.
Does he have any of the 2-mana 3/3? The oh god, what's it called? The black card with the blue activation.
Returned Phalanx?
Yes.
No, he does not.
He does not. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, that card would be excellent to bring in against Dan's deck.
Very good in this format. He does not seem to have other cards that will help him in an aggressive match.
He has a Vulpine Goliath he's not playing, but a slow, clunky 6-drop is not where we want to be in this format.
That seems like a poor plan.
Yeah. Unless maybe you're playing against a slightly slower to develop 4-color deck like Rich Owen played against last round. Might be able to get away with that.
Even then,
it's pretty loose.
Probably want to be aggressive in those matchups, right?
Indeed.
Well, Targaryens are up a game against the unsurprising Greensleeves.
Yeah.
Typical. At least Brian doesn't have some kind of obnoxious, greedy mana like he usually does.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. And at least his keeps were, like, semi-sane within the realm of reality. Like, he kept a 2-lander. Like, I've seen this guy keep a Temple of Abandon, Mana Dork on the play, and somehow piece it all together into a Domri Rade, into a Stormbreath Dragon 2 turns later.
He's kept double red Sylvan Caryatid as his only mana sources before.
Yeah, it's...
Unsurprisingly, he did not cast a spell that game.
Yeah.
Sometimes justice happens, I guess.
I personally find it very interesting that he chooses to play Birthing Pod in Modern. So sometimes it feels like he's always able to tutor up the cards he needs on top of his deck, so why would he outsource that to a piece of cardboard?
Brandon is very good at drawing Linvala whenever he needs it,
yeah,
and then sacrificing it. Anyways.
Alright, looks like Brian only has 1 or 2 lands a gain, and... Oh, he's keeping.
He's telegraphing the number of lands in his hand pretty clearly here, which is a bit awkward, but we'll see that happen. Brian being on the play gives him a much better chance, and Dan does not have a 1-drop this time, so hopefully we'll get a game out of this one. Spiteful Return. Brian has decided to be the aggressor this time.
Yes. Well, at the very least, it might be able to be a chump blocker or trade with an aggressively costed low-toughness creature on Dan's side, but...
Dan does not have any other 1-toughness creatures that I can tell in his deck
besides Tormented Hero?
It's just the Tormented Hero. There's Deathbelly Raiders, there's like Agent of the Fates.
Well,
or you could Magma Jet at main phase.
It trades with the Magma Jet. I think that's...
It's a good decision by Dan to main phase the Magma Jet. So as to play around the what's it
Feral
called?
Invocation?
The Feral Invocation that was represented but not played last game.
Indeed.
Either way, does not want that card to be countered by a
Maybe
combat
Dan.
trick because the damage from Spite Forward turn can get way out of hand very quickly.
Indeed. And I actually think for Brian, that's probably like one of the best things that could have happened to that card, considering the texture of Dan's deck.
It's fair.
Because as the game goes on, it might get outclassed pretty quickly.
Yeah. Dan not having an aggressive start is good.
Yeah.
Generally, a 2-mana 1/1, regardless of how much damage it deals when it attacks, is somewhat embarrassing when playing against an aggro deck.
Yeah.
He's probably gonna see a Blood Toll Harpy here, I would assume. Or going in the tank. That also works.
Yeah. So Dan's got quite a few options here. No idea what he's pondering over, but
Kragma Butcher. That is a good card.
what does it do?
It is a 2/3,
Yeah.
and its Inspired trigger gives it +2/+0.
All right.
So first turn is a 2/3, and the following turns it's a 4/3. And it's a very good 3-drop.
Yeah.
One of the better red commons.
Yeah, trades up with a lot of things, even big green creatures.
Yeah. Not quite the Neshanas, but we'll see
Yeah.
what Brian's able to do to... that does beat it. The Fairy's Band Tromper is a good card.
Mm-hmm.
Its Inspired trigger gives it a +1/+1 counter on a slightly larger body.
Now, in this format, do you just always send in your 2/3 representing a trick, even if you don't have it?
Yes.
All right.
People frequently don't and decide to play safe, but it largely depends on whether or not you're able to mind game your opponent and get ahead of them there. In this situation, he has thought long enough about it that I probably would not choose to attack.
Indeed.
You have to be
Also-
forceful and confident, especially
Yeah.
if you're tapping before. Although he probably has an Ordeal. Nyxborn Rollicker, that will also do it.
Yeah, that pumps
making
it up to a
slightly
3/4,
larger.
so it can
Yeah.
attack past that 3/3 blocker.
And it will be a 5/4 in following turns.
Indeed. Brian's an aggressive player, but not aggressive enough to block here. That'd be
That would have been a psychotic block.
very.
It's interesting to note that Dan does not have a 4th land, which actually is not really a big deal for his deck. Unless he has his Targaryen Dragon in hand, in which case that would be awkward. What is this?
It's always rough when you can't cast.
He has his own Ordeal. He has his own Ordeal.
Ordeal of Erebos.
That's going to trigger next turn because of the Inspired ability on the Centaurs.
Indeed, and
So that is going to get 2 pieces of gas out of Dan's hand. So if this game goes long, that'd be really good.
it looks like he's being punished for. Oh,
Brian doing math before choosing the time defeat, realizing that this is the only chance that's going to be good. He was complaining to me earlier that time defeat seemed poor in his deck. I told him he was wrong. I like being right.
yeah. It certainly let him dominate the board. Dan just has a lonely 1/1 against a right now 4/4. That'll turn into a 5/5.
He's a 6/6 attacking
and
next
then
turn.
a 6/6
so
on the attack.
this game's going so far pretty hard in Brian's favor. Given that Dan's removal suite is fairly centric around either having the, I think he has a Lash of the Whip. Yeah, there's a Lash of the Whip. He has to use Agent of the Fates trigger or like Magma Jet. None of which really are going to deal with this card right now.
Indeed. And with his board state being so poorly developed, it's going to be very hard to erase this.
One might say that a 1/1 is poorly developed. Yes. A complete and utter lack of development.
He did use his mana on turns 2, 3, and 4, but it just
Playing the Satyr Nyx. Satyr Nyxsmith, I got that, yeah.
All right,
The 2/1 haste, it has an Inspired trigger that lets you pay 3, or I believe 3 mana, it might be 4 mana,
Oh, okay.
to create another 2/1 haste.
So that should
it's a good card on the offensive here, but
Yeah, that should drop Brian down to 17. Dan's at 16 right now, but Brian's winning the race right now, at least how it looks on board.
yeah. Did we count the +3 from time defeat?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you. Math. It's a tough skill sometimes, but
Brian did remember the trigger on his Ferris Man Tromper, so that will be in his favor, considering whether or not to.
Is that a disciple of Phoenix in his hand?
Seems to just be a Disciple of Phoenix and a Farika's Cure, I think. So it's going to trigger. He's going to dig for the information about what cards Dan is discarding before he makes any further decisions. Looks like he's losing Labyrinth Champion and a Death Bellow Raider. And a Hero of Lena Tower to follow up.
Alright, so that's the creature that if it gets heroic whenever
pay
it
X,
sucks, pay X, but X
put X
counters on
counters.
it. Yeah.
Good card, not insane. Better in the late game than most other heroic cards, but
And
not a good 1-drop. So he is playing it in the correct turn.
Alright, so
Freakus Cure takes out the Satyr Nyxsmith, taking out any threats of it creating trump blockers to deal with the The Fairies Band Centaur.
Indeed, pumping Brian up to 19. He's not only handedly winning this race, but handedly dominating the board.
The game looks very solid in his favor. I'd be surprised to see it go any other way.
Yeah, it's
Although if Dan is able to deal with the 2 cards in Brian's board, then he would be in a very good position. But I think it's out of reach for him now.
Yeah.
Heartbeat does not contribute to that plan.
Knocking Brian down to 19 and Dan to 15. But it's going to be really hard for Dan to deal with this board, as you told us the texture of his deck list. It looks like he's really strapped for answers, and his mana is underdeveloped, so it's going to be hard for him to employ Lash of the Web.
He can just summon his Eunuch army to defeat his opponents here, I'm pretty sure. That is a Targaryen
strategy,
power.
yeah.
Yes.
The 6/6 crashes in.
Is it not a 7/7 this turn?
7/7?
He might have forgotten the turn.
He might have. I don't think I saw him move up the die, but 6 or 7, it towers over Dan's army. I think he's contemplating a chump block with the 1/1.
On our blurry screen, it looks like it's 3, but this is where the limitations of our technology comes into play here.
This should roughly knock him down to 9 from 15.
And we're going to see another card be taken out of Dan's hand here.
Yeah.
Brian playing a very strong attrition game. Even if Dan does start hitting his land drops, he is not going to have the gas that he would have expected to. And he scoops them up rather than revealing Brian any further information. Very good decision on his end.
Indeed. Alright, is there any way Dan could sideboard for this game 3 now that he's on the play? Let's see here. If I was Dan, what would I bring in? March of the Return, infinitely too slow, doesn't combo with your game plan at all.
It seemed unlikely that he had very many other options.
Yeah.
Oh, he has a... Oh, no,
Wild Celebrants, no targets. Demolish, Brian's mana base is sane.
Regardless, Demolish is generally just not a card you want to be playing. He has a Necron Conscriptor, which could go off at some point as well. Seems reasonable in the matchup. But otherwise, I think he's actually already playing all of the cards that would be reasonable.
Yeah, it seems like both of our players here are using every card available to them, and all the cards on the bench are pretty underwhelming. He might consider Weight of the Underworld as he's on the play. It might allow him to tempo out Brian, but that's a very...
It is a much better card in the play, but...
It's very uninspired.
The rest of his deck seems considerably better. He has 2 Magma Jets to kill X2s already, and you probably just want to be playing more creatures rather than doing that. Even like Magma Jet and another 2-drop. He has a bunch of 2-drops, making the 4 slot.
It's very hard to make room for that.
Indeed.
Brian's going over his main deck and his lack of options in his sideboard. Things like he has Asphodel Wanderer, which is pretty atrocious. Return Centaur.
Yeah, those are the 2 cards you can consider.
Yeah,
the Centaur might be fair. It's got a very big butt.
Yes, 4 toughness is...
Unfortunately, the 1-mana 1/1 does not interact very well in the first couple of turns. He can regenerate fine, but you lose too much tempo for it.
Indeed. And
Brian's considering cutting a Spiteful Return, which would be reasonable. And he pulled out another card, so I have no idea. We will ask him later. I might have agreed with a Spiteful Return cut for the Centaur. I'm not sure what else he put out, though.
That... Especially when the only creature with 1 toughness you've seen from Dan's deck in 2 games is only Tormented Hero. It's just not lining up properly with Dan's deck.
Brian was on the aggressive in that second game, though, so maybe he still has that idea in his head. But looking at the deck list, it's pretty clear that Dan is the aggressor in this matchup, and if he is not on the offense, he's probably going to be losing, as we saw in that last game.
Indeed. Especially when you only have 1/1s and 2/1s against green creatures that just get bigger and bigger every turn.
A lot of them start at 1 or 2 toughness, though, so we'll see.
Yeah, those Magma Jets might be really key in letting Dan tempo out Brian.
Indeed. Brian does have a bunch of cards like Nyxborn Wolf and Swordwise Centaur, which
should gum up the ground really well.
They don't really, just because of they have very poor toughness, which can be quite awkward for them. Although, fortunately for him, when they die, it's very good to be following up with like Nemesis Immortals. So.
Innistrad drafters, we're looking for Josh Goldenthal, Kevin Park,
every creature,
and Michael Michael. Innistrad draft number 2. Your draft is waiting.
As you could hear there, 401 Games has a wide array of side events, like excellently priced Innistrad side events. I'm kind of jealous of everyone.
$10 Innistrad drafts. Yeah. I actually wish I wasn't doing this.
So update.
Later.
You gotta hear it.
Later.
I managed to drop. I'm still lost.
Alright, so Dan with a...
Hitting both of his land drops. Seemed like they both kept their 7.
Yeah, and not contributing anything to the board.
Again, Brian with the first play, and Dan does not have the Magma Jet to kill it. Somewhat unfortunate for him. We'll see if Dan has a good turn 3 here. It's probably an Agent of the Faith. That'd be good. Kragma returning to the scene.
Alright, so we have another 2-3 Centaur coming down.
Not so great when you're not on the aggressive already, but
yeah,
I'm sure it'll do. Brian has a Voyaging Satyr as a follow-up, very strong.
And chooses to keep back the Swordwise Centaur. Even if Dan has the trick, he's going to make him use it.
Brian is representing aspects of the Hydra, so
that too.
Given that his deck is primarily been seen to be mono-green in this matchup, his opponent should think it's mono-green.
Yeah.
It's very likely that there would be an aspect of the Hydra. So it's very possible Dan would play around that.
Yeah.
But if I were Brian, I would not have done this, made this play. Seemed to work out for him, but
indeed,
obviously.
Well, I think Brian's hand is full of gas, so he's just looking to trade time and mana.
Yeah,
so he has time to deploy his bigger threats.
If he has the Nemesis as well, then that could be very strong.
Yeah. Every creature that goes to the bin is effectively -1 off the mana cost for that Nemesis. An attack with a Voyaging Satyr, that's...
Satyr is, however, getting aggro. It's the Fairies Band Tromper to follow it up.
Yeah.
Brian's board in the ground is considerably better than Dan's in the air.
Brian's at 19 right now, and Dan's at 18. That Blood Toll Harpy taxing both players. Looks like Dan's flooding out here. Maybe he kept a hand with a dragon in it.
And obviously not drawing a second red. Or maybe it's just...
yeah. Or he might draw the second red on the last possible turn to perfectly curve out. You never know.
Well, he should channel his opponent's top decking skills. Perhaps play it on the correct turn.
That does sound like a black ability.
That is, in fact, a Vampiric Tutor ability. Harpy gets in there.
Knocking Brian down to 17. To Dan's 18.
Extracts its blood toll. Brian just drew a... Is that a Wayfinder or a Nesh and Asp? I can't tell. I don't believe he has Nesh and Asp.
No, he does not. He was not fortunate enough to open
I guess we'll see what it is later.
Yeah.
As it is, Brian has a 6 land. There are a bunch of powerful 6 drops in his deck,
yeah.
so, and 5 drops for that matter. So, and instead he's paying 4 for something. Spiteful Return on the Lash of the Whip in response. Strong play.
All right.
Brian does have an attacker left over, but if Dan has any kind of creature that any kind of reasonable toughness,
yeah,
can make Spiteful Return quite embarrassing. But the Voyaging Satyr beats do continue.
Knocking Dan down to 17. Alright, so...
Yeah, goes in the tech. Ideally, you'd probably want to go Mountain Dragon here, but...
I'm sure if he had it, he'd have slammed it by now.
It's quite possible.
Yeah. He might be thinking about keeping his Blood Toll Harpy back on defense to trade with the effective 3-1.
He would lose that race.
Yeah. Alright, adds another hasty attacker to the field and bashes in for 4.
Sometimes the best defense is offense.
Yeah.
Brian probably wants to trade with the Nick Smith here. It's possible Dan has Boon of Erebos, which would be very good in this situation unless Brian has a big follow-up, which he probably does.
But if you're in Brian's position, you just want to extend the game as long as you can.
Yeah. I would likely block. I would absolutely value a combat trick in my opponent's hand as considerably greater than a Spiteful Return didn't play.
Especially if it's Boon of Erebos, something that doesn't necessarily let him win this race, as it does too to him.
Indeed.
All right, Brian.
Although I don't think there's much of a race going on, given that both players are at 17.
Yeah.
Both are still trying to develop board position, and killing the Nick Smith does inhibit board position.
Well, I would say this is definitely the first step of the race from Dan.
It looks like Brian has a Raised by Wolves and a Forest in hand.
Okay, so he's trying to keep as many creatures in play as he can. Dan
he definitely wants to play it on the Spiteful Return. Second Blood Toll Harpy joins the fray.
Yeah. Knocking Brian down from 17 to 12, and Dan from 17 to 16. So,
Is that a Herald of Torment? No, it's I can't tell. I'm not gonna speculate. Probably gonna see Raised by Wolves on the Spiteful Return here. That was a good call.
Indeed. So, not only does that add 2 wolves into play, but it also increases the Eidolon's power and toughness by 2.
So he's going to be attacking for 5 this turn.
Brian's being
yes.
fetching those sweet 2/2 wolf tokens.
Thank you, whoever else is there, for ensuring that happens. Thank you to Jeff Greenberg. Very eager to be involved in the streaming process in one way or another.
Is that it?
That
looks like a delicious spore token.
Oh man, I just want some bacon right about now.
Yeah.
Hashtag fat. Alright, so I assume Brian's going to be attacking with the Spiteful Return, and probably with the Satyr as well. Or he could not attack with the Satyr. It's a very tempting block for the Nicksmith.
I think the attack with the Satyr is acceptable right now, since unless he plans to trade it with the red creature on his opponent's side of the board.
I think he would like to trade it, but it's not ideally happening, so...
True.
I think the free point of damage is probably worth it.
Yeah.
Although his opponent is playing is going to have 2 hasty dudes in play this turn, so...
So Brian cracks in for 5 damage, if I got that correct?
Yep.
Knocking him down from 16 to 11.
Keeping this race in check.
Yeah.
Apparently we did not supply them with the appropriate tokens. Apologies. We'll try to get that sorted out in future rounds. But
yes. Hopefully they remember to add the power and toughness generated from the quote board token in play. It's supposed to be a wolf.
I doubt they would forget that. Dan going in the tank and what to do for his turn. He did generate a token off the Nyx with his Inspired ability, improving his board presence. That does go well against his opponent's 2/2 wolves. No, I was about to say boars. They are not boars. They are wolves. It is relevant.
And right now he's got Brian on a 3-turn clock in the air, as Brian's at 12, and he's got 4 flying power.
It is important to remember, though, that green does like a bunch of creatures with reach in this format, so it's very easy for that plan to get stonewalled.
Yes.
There are also Farika's Cures. He saw Farika's Cure and he saw Weight of the Underworld already. Those are 2 cards that can stonewall that plan, so he has to be very careful about what he does here.
Yeah.
And his board does not do very well against the Spiteful Return as well.
Unfortunately, he might be forced into pursuing that plan, even though it's not completely consistent or safe from trumps, as you pointed out. But
indeed. If Dan does not have another play here, he probably still attacks with the Harpies and then just attempts to trade his 2 ground creatures. Yeah, attempts to trade the 2 ground creatures into the Spiteful Return just to stem the bleeding.
Yeah.
Or maybe even put them in front of the wolves if Brian chooses to attack with them.
Yeah, and that way at least you're guaranteeing blocking damage and reducing future damage next turn, because the Spiteful Return will be smaller.
What did you draw there? Brian drew Sip of Hemlock. Assuming he has Sip of Hemlock in his deck.
Yeah, I believe he does.
That is the wrong side of the deck list. He does have a Sip of Hemlock, so that is very good here.
Yeah.
Probably just blow up the Satyr Nicksmith. Very interesting name, and just get in there for a lot of damage, probably locking up the game in the process.
Do you think there's any merit to playing the Sip post-combat?
Unlikely, because I think he intends to block with both of the creatures, and he wants to keep a Spiteful Return on the board.
Okay, yeah.
He is absolutely the aggressor if he plays that card, and his opponent does not have an answer. Even if his opponent has Boon, that's like a very good situation for Brian. Regeneration does tap the creatures, then you can still attack with his Spiteful Return safely.
Yes.
Looks like Brian's doing the math before making the decision. Wise play. I would imagine, unless he has something considerably better in hand, it would be crazy to do anything else.
Indeed. Even though this format does seem really fast, it's important to keep
he has a downfall as well.
Oh, wow.
Jeez. Sometimes you have them all. So he's probably going to go for the...
I have a feeling we're going to see that Voyaging Satyr get in there.
It might be very reasonable to simply attack for the team when his opponent goes to double block downfall one of them.
Yeah.
Although that is risky if he decides to go block the two wolves instead. That has some kind of beater next turn, like a big creature.
But then he'll be able to untap and either Hero's Downfall or Sip that and bash through again.
That's true. He does have 2 insane removal spells.
Yeah. So with the Bounty of Riches, like...
Unless Dan has something really good, looks like Brian's going to be taking this match.
And he is stalled on 1 red mana, right?
Yeah.
So
which may not be relevant, but it's probably relevant.
I like to think it's relevant. I'm holding out hope for the Targaryens.
Big fan of the Targaryens here.
Yeah.
Daenerys will win the Iron Throne after I'm just not gonna spoil anything. we're gonna stop that right now.
I'm rooting for Tyrion, as unlikely and insane as that may be. But you know, a man can dream.
Oh wow, we didn't even think of that block. That block obviously makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So he throws the token in front of the spiteful returned.
Should have called me out on that one.
And Brian's clearly telegraphing some removal spell or some combat trick. Obstacle with the hero's downfall.
Isn't that one questionable? Doesn't he want to shoot the Nicksmith instead? And this way he does the same amount. And
yes. What is the power and toughness of those tokens generated by Satyr Nicksmith?
They are 2/1s.
They're 2/1s. Oh, okay. So, yes.
That seemed like.
Wow.
Well, whatever.
Yeah, like, so Herald of Torment's a very big play here because it breaks Dan's offense and also snaps back, threatening to kill, potentially even on the next turn. But
much damage did he do? Did 4 damage there? 4, 5, 6, 7?
No, I believe he only did 3. One of the wolves was blocked, 1 got through, and 1 Voyaging Satyr.
And the 2 damage from the Spiteful.
Oh, yes.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. What was his opponent at? 11?
Dan was at 11.
Okay. Just trying to think through in my head what the damage would have been if Brian had bestowed the Herald of Torment.
Right.
If Brian had bestowed the Herald of Torment on the Spiteful Return, just made an alpha, it would have forced his opponent to get rid of his hand and then end up at 2. Sorry, to throw the 2 guys on the boars and end up at 2. But Magma Jet finishes off the Spiteful Returns. Brings us closer to parity, but Dan's still in a difficult situation unless he can deal with that Herald. It is bigger than his creatures.
Yes, and
Brian does still have 2 removal spells in hand.
Yeah, that's I have a feeling Brian could have sequenced his plays a bit better, but with such high quality cards available to him, it looks like he's
at the moment, unless Dan does have another kind of dramatic play on board, which seems unlikely given his struggle with red mana. He is in fact dead on board to Zip of Hemlock.
If he had that Magma Jet in hand, do you think casting it on his upkeep would have been better than main phase winning it?
Possibly, depends on what you're digging for.
Yeah, it's hard to know without knowing their hand contents, of course.
Yeah, it's very likely it has the dragon in hand, just want to draw a second red.
Yeah.
I was wrong about the dead on board comment, by the way. I'm going to take that one back. You can still just block the Herald of Torment.
Yeah.
Probably still lose, but top bottom with the Magma Jet.
Always important to keep track of that.
Passes the turn right back.
Brian drops to 11, then points out the Herald of Torment trigger.
Unfortunately, Herald of Torment does have a drawback. Its drawback is that it's unbeatable, but so we're going to see the Sip quickly go down. And then Dan is going to have to block the Herald of Torment, dropping him to a precarious one unless he has something fantastic.
So it looks like all that damage Brian got in with that Voyaging Satyr is starting to pay off in these later turns.
If he didn't miss the first one, his opponent would be dead right now.
Indeed.
It's possible Brian was attempting to represent a different combat trick earlier, but he was not consistent with it later, so
yeah, it's
didn't matter.
When you're trying to sell a lie to your opponent, you have to be
keep lying.
You gotta keep lying, right? Like
Dan does block the Herald of Torment, going to 1.
Chooses to live 1 more turn. Alright, so he
probably gonna, unless there's some kind of drown in sorrow shenanigan going on here.
And Dan extends the hand.
And that's the match. Brian Liu taking the match in 3.
Yep.
Only dropping a game to a very very convincing Tormented Hero Ordeal start.
Yeah. Both really good decks. It just looks like Dan's draws didn't quite line up for games 2 and 3.
Wasn't able to be aggressive, whereas Brian succeeded in taking that role, and with a bunch of removal and a bunch of good tempo spells.
Yeah.
And by tempo spells, I mean Bestow or Enchant Creature cards. He's able to take the match. So we'll see you next round.
Yeah. Let's tune in for round 3.
Thanks for watching.